Hey, grade eights. Welcome to the chapter 10 PowerPoint. What chapter 10? The title for chapter 10 is called A Deadly Meeting, and that is for a very good reason. Is we're going to find out what happens when the Spanish, who are expanding outwards, looking for resources, looking for gold, looking to convert souls, actually run into the Aztecs. And of course, these are two very different worldviews. One's expansionist, one both are in a way expansionist, but also one people, the Aztecs, are very isolated. So we're going to see what happens. Here are some of the things that we will learn throughout this chapter. So we are going to learn how might differences in worldview contribute to the dominance of one culture over another, what aspects of technology, religion, and culture might affect the meeting between the Aztecs and Spanish, how does a leader's worldview affect his or her choices, in what way did technology and disease contribute to the Spanish dominance of the Aztecs, and how did the worldviews of the Spanish and the Aztecs influence strategies they used against one another. So, once again, we can look, and when we look at the two different worldviews of the Aztecs and the Spanish, we see that there are going to be a lot of difference, but there is also going to be some overlap. The person we need to know about in chapter 10 is a man named Hernan Cortez. He is a very important figure in the sense that he is a very good leader. He's very important, and a lot of the decisions that are made are uh, are important because he even though many things are not individual in history, a lot of the times the specific decisions that people make in history are have results for major events. So we have Hernan Cortez. He was born in Spain. He believed the Inquisition had produced Spanish unity and stability, so he's very Catholic, and he believed that Spain was a better place to live because of it. He idolized Christopher Columbus, and he read all about him, and it influenced him to move to the canal colonies when he was 19. He had a desire for gold, he had a desire to make a fortune, but he also desired to be legendary. He would desire to be a legend. He wanted glory, like many of the conquistadors we're going to learn about did. So he was a conquistador, which means conqueror, and it is the term the Spanish leaders in the Americas used to describe themselves. So they saw themselves as conquerors, is meaning that if you are a conquistador, it is your job to go find land and conquer it. So little tidbit is Cortez's desire for gold was an inspiration behind the Pirates of the Caribbean movie The Curse of the Black Pearl. So Cortez, when he leaves to the colonies, he goes to the Caribbean. He was given farmland in the present day the Dominican Republic. However, he wants gold instead. So he asked to join a mission to conquer Cuba. And he does so with another 300 men. So already we see this sort of adventure in adventuristic character in Cortez and this want for glory. So before we move on, I want to go through the conquistadors because they have a very distinct way of fighting. So we have what is called the conquistador formula, which is a series of steps that is repeated over and over again, which allows the conquistadors in Spain to conquer a lot of South America. So the conquistador formula starts with an expedition setting out from Spanish territory or a recent colony they had conquered. So that is the first step. The second step is after landing in a new area in a new region, the Spanish conquistadors would try to meet peacefully with the first group they encountered. Their aim was to determine which group was most powerful. So they would try to make contact with people they meet in order to gain intelligence over the area they were at and find out who is the strongest. So they would meet, exchange gifts, and they would learn a lot about where they landed. The Spanish would then invite the leader of the most powerful group to meet and exchange gifts. When that leader came, they would seize the leader and threaten to kill him unless his people obeyed him. So what would happen is they would basically take him hostage and either they would execute him or he would submit to Spanish rule. If they had to fight, so sometimes obviously the Spanish leader would not, he'd be killed and the second command would take over, is the Spanish would ensure they would fight out in the open. So their horses and armor and their technology would give them the distinct advantage. So they would pick where they would fight. And then finally, once that area is taken over, the leading conquistador of that area would then become the governor of the new colony, and his second in command would then organize the next missions to somewhere else. And um, anyone they took over would become slaves. And basically, this whole process repeats itself over and over and over again till much of South America is conquered by Spain. Um, so Cortez joins this mission to Cuba, and he remains in Cuba for 8 years. He is second under a man named Governor Velazquez, and he is he is given land, he is given some territory, and he's living well. However, he starts to grow restless, so he starts to hear word from people of a very advanced civilization in the Yucatan Peninsula, and he heard of lots of wealth, and so this piques his interest. So what's going to happen then is he decides that he is going to want to go on a mission and try to find this group and take them over. So Velazquez ends up funding this message, and he begins to search Cuba for people who are willing, conquistadors who are willing to go with them, and he gets loans to buy ships and buy money to buy things he will need for the journey. So Velazquez eventually realizes that Cortez is going to be a challenge to him, so he tries to stop the expedition. He was worried that Cortez would get all the glory for discovering and take authority over new lands, so Velazquez tries to stop him. Cortez, and this is where this individualistic characteristic is so important, is he ignores Velazquez and goes anyway. So he takes his men, he takes his ships, and he lands on the coast of Mexico, and he establishes what is called La Rica de la Cruz, and he established an independent government. He claims it a colony for Spain, and he is now only responsible to King Carlos I. He is no longer responsible for Velazquez. He no longer legally has to listen to him. He sends one ship back with treasures he finds to Spain and to ensure that he is giving gold to the king, and then he sinks all his other boats. Which means, and this is important because then his men can no longer go back. They are stuck. The only way to survive is to move forward. So, so what we're going to find out with a lot of the Aztecs and the Spanish is their weapons are very different, and in fact, the Spanish are going to have a lot stronger weapons, especially with regards to their crossbows and their weapons. And one of the biggest one is the musket. So the muskets will take the Aztecs by surprise. A musket is a long rifle gun. It's a gun, and Aztecs obviously do not have guns, and this is going to scare the Aztecs, and it's going to be what is probably going to turn the time to them. Moctezuma sends ambassadors to meet the Spanish once he hears he lands. So Moctezuma is the emperor of the Aztecs, and Cortez, when the ambassadors are there, he orders to fire the guns to ensure that they can see how strong the Spanish are. The other advantage that the Spanish are going to have is the horse. So the Aztecs had never seen horses before. The size, power, and speed fascinated the Aztecs. The Spanish were trained riders and could hold reins with one hand and weapons in the other. The Aztecs on foot cannot compete because I don't know if you know what happens when a cavalry of horses meets a standing army. It's not good for the people on the ground. The horses are going to win every time. The other thing that is going to play a huge role in this sort of story is going to be the role of diseases. The Spanish brought diseases from Europe that they had built up immunity, and just like in other places around the world, the Aztecs have no immunity to things such as smallpox, and this is going to break out and kill a large number of Aztecs, which is further going to weaken their ability to do, much like us, is we all do not have immunity to COVID-19, hence the reason why it spreads so quickly. Well, skip that one. So what happens is, so Cortez lands in Mexico and he moves forward trying to find the Aztecs. So Cortez first meets a group of people called the Tabascan people, and they are given he defeats them and is given gifts of food, clothing, gold, and slaves. He is also given a young woman named Malanche. who is given to him as a slave. And this is important because she is another character in the story who is going to be of huge influence over Cortez. In fact, Cortez is going to fall in love and marry Melange. But she becomes his translator. She gives him all the information he is going to need to uh, uh, take over the Aztecs. Melange becomes a link between Cortez and Moctezuma, and Melange spoke both Mayan and Nahuatl, and learned Spanish, and she becomes Cortez's advisor and a spy. So Cortez adapted strategies along the routes, and he meets another group of people called the Tontonacs, who dislike paying tribute to the Aztecs. So Cortez protects them in exchange for using them as warriors and increasing his numbers to fight the Aztecs. Um, then he meets another group of people called the Talaxans, and they fights the Spanish, and the Spanish fends them off and makes peace. And once again, he gets more soldiers for them. And then they meet um, another group called the Chiluans, who are a loyal group to the Aztecs who try to attack the Spanish, and they also are defeated by the Spain. So Spain is getting more men, they are getting slaves, they are getting confidence as they march towards the Aztecs. So here is sort of the groups. Here's the route they take. So from Veracruz, where they land, and then where they move along here, and where they meet all the different people, and until eventually they get to Tenochtitlan, which is right here, and this is where the battle against the Aztecs are going to take place. So Moctezuma knows the Spanish are coming, but he decides he's going to sit back and wait to see what the Spanish would do, and then make a decision. So instead of riding out and meeting them, they waited until they get closer and closer. So eventually, the Spanish do make it to Tenochtitlan, and a battle does not break out at the beginning. In fact, Cortez and his soldiers are taken to live in into a palace where they're shown the glories of the Aztec city. They see markets, they see golds, they see treasure, and this site leads to influence Cortez to want to attack and conquer the lands of the Aztecs, because this is his chance to get gold. This is his chance to bring glory to Spain and glory to himself and become a legendary figure. So what happens is eventually the Spanish place Moctezuma. They rise up, and place Moctezuma under house arrest. They start to loot gold and melt it down. And they basically forced Moctezuma to make themselves a subject of the Spanish. But here is the kicker and this is what is going to throw a wrench into Cortez's plans. Velazquez, who Cortez disobeyed, gets an army together, and he sends troops to go arrest Cortez. So Cortez has to leave to deal with this. So Cortez leaves Tenochtitlan to deal with this, and leaves a man named Pedro de Alvarado in charge. When Cortez leaves, he lets the Aztecs hold a festival. Hold the festival, but then he has troops massacre all the dances. So this is going to do a couple of things. So Cortez is gone. Alvarado decides to massacre all these dancers and people who are celebrating this festival, and this is going to make the Aztecs mad. So this is where the battle for Tenochtitlan begins. So Cortez meets the Velazquez back on the coast. He defeats him, and he returns to Tenochtitlan. When he returns to Tenochtitlan, it is in an uproar because of this murder, and this massacre of the Aztec festival at the Aztec festival. So Cortez comes back to Tenochtitlan, gets Moctezuma, and forces him to speak to his people to try to calm them down. Of course, the Aztecs do not like this. They do not want to listen to the Spanish, and they see Moctezuma as weak. So they eventually end up throwing stones at him, and they kill him. So the Aztecs then begin to attack the Spanish and their allies, and they kill some of them, but they drive the rest out of the city. So Cortez, who has been defeated, then goes back and regroups. He sits, he builds up his forces, and what eventually happens is 6 months later he rides and attacks Tenochtitlan again. What is going to be of huge aid to him is this: is in that time smallpox has ravaged the city. Uh, 20, almost a quarter of all the Aztec population is killed, weakening their army, weakening their soldiers. So before they attack the city, the Spanish are smart. They cut the aqueducts, which is how the cities get water and supplies, and lay siege to Tenochtitlan. So Tenochtitlan is goes 80 days without water, without food, without any way of getting supplies, which further weakens the city, and eventually the Aztecs are defeated by the Spanish. Eventually, once they are weak enough, the Spanish ride in and conquer Tenochtitlan. The city was torn down, and the city was torn down, and a Spanish settlement was raised in its place. Um, about 60,000 Aztecs survived in the city, and they then become slaves. So in the roads lie, and this is a poem which sort of summarizes the last days of the Aztecs. So in the roads lie the broken spears, without roofs are the houses. The red are their walls with blood, maggots swarm in the streets and squares. The waters have turned crimson as if they were dyed. In shields was our defense, but shields cannot hold back the desolation. We have eaten lumps of adobe, lizards and rats, soil turned to dust, even the worm. So this poem speaks to sort of this idea of being cut off, and sort of this cut off, and how much the Aztec people were suffering as they were laid waste to. So that is a very quick rendition of how the Aztecs were captured by the Spanish. Um, Once again, please watch that Heroes and Villains Hernan Cortez. It is a really nice summary of what I just went on and answer the questions. And I hope you guys, if you have any questions, let me know. I know that was quick, but hopefully it gives you a bit of a summary of how the Spanish were able to conquer the Aztecs. Have a great day.